Hola, amigos, amigas. We're here in the room today. For discussion. It's going to be Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin. Now, this is a relatively recent novel. It's a bit more of a novella. It was written, I think, in 2017, plus or minus, let's say, 3 years. And Samanta Schweblin, she's an Argentinian writer. I don't think this was her first novel, or it's written as a novel, but to me it reads a bit more like a novella. She's written a few works before this. However, this one has definitely gained her quite a lot of international acclaim. And what does this story, Fever Dream, what does it concern itself with? Well, it was written in Spanish originally, because she's Argentinian. And the translation, just a note on that, the literal translation of the Spanish title is Rescue Distance. The book is originally titled Rescue Distance in Spanish. However, they translated the book to Fever Dream as its English title. Now, why this is the case, just to note that Fever Dream really, in my opinion, refers to the style that this is written in. It's very much the style of this story that is quite interesting. It's a dialogue between a woman who's dying. She's in a clinic. She doesn't really know why she's there. And she's in dialogue with this boy. And it is very delirious, their dialogue. Quite creepy, I'd say. But the boy asserts a strong authority in the exchange. And he's trying to show this woman, her name is Amanda, she's essentially the main character. He's trying to have her recollect aspects of her recent past, which led her to this predicament. She's essentially been poisoned, and that's why she's in the clinic. She's unsure about that. However, he is leading her to understand how this came about and what happened in the story. There's a bit of a mysterious element to this, obviously. However, I wouldn't really describe it as a mystery. I think the fact that she got poisoned it becomes quite apparent that there's something wrong with her physically, and that she consumed something toxic. However, the boy is trying to have her really hone in on that moment, how it happened. So this exchange very much is a delirious exchange, fitting for the name of Fever Dream. And it's really the style that to me is quite interesting of this story. And I think it's interesting because the boy does demonstrate quite a lot of authority and control in it, even though he's much younger than this woman. And it might be by virtue of him himself experiencing this poisoning himself. The boy, his name's David, and he himself was also poisoned at a point. And he had to go through a similar situation as Amanda. However, in Spanish, the title of Rescue Distance is also an interesting one, but that relates less to the form and more to the actual story. Amanda and her daughter, Nina, are from Buenos Aires. They're from the city. However, they're vacationing in a rural area of Argentina. And Amanda is plagued with the the concerns that any mother would have in regards to the safety of her child. She's constantly thinking about the rescue distance between her and Nina. Basically, how far away is Nina and how quickly can I get to Nina if something bad happens. Amanda is constantly thinking about this. Now they go to the rural area and they're vacationing there, and they encounter Carla, who is David's mother. And Carla is very much described by Amanda, because Amanda's describing everything to us. So there is a sense of, is she really remembering everything accurately? We have to give her the benefit of the doubt. And David is kind of dictating to her, try to remember this part, hone in on this part. And he's also telling her, this is superfluous, this is unimportant, you should be focusing more on that other thing. But Carla is very much described in a very exalted and beautiful way by Amanda. She's sort of enchanted by Carla's beauty, it seems. That's at least what struck me. She's described very feminine. However, there's a darkness to Carla that's quite evident in this story. There's something a bit creepy, maybe not creepy, but off about her. And she seems almost, especially during the first half of the story, she seemed almost too eager to get close to Nina, Amanda's daughter. And I'm not really sure where the story was going with this, but perhaps it was just to evoke this feeling, this almost predatory feeling, at least I felt, that Carla had with Nina. Yet at the same time, Carla disavows her son, David, as being a monster. And this is because years ago, David himself became poisoned. He became poisoned because he drank from a poisoned stream. And Carla managed to save him. And she managed to save him, it seems, because she took him to this green woman, who is this woman who has been saving tons of townspeople, tons of children from the town who themselves have been poisoned. Now, the poisoning from pesticides, this is revealed as the cause of the ills in this small town. It's this that is causing deformities in children. I feel like it's while I say it's revealed, it does slowly become revealed, I would say. However, it's not as much of it's not a large reveal at the end, which is why I'm reluctant to call this a mystery story. There are definitely elements in which we're uncertain what is happening, especially because of this narrative, this strange, delirious narrative. We're unsure what is happening. And I guess that is essentially the mystery. However, it does become quite clear that there is a toxic element in the environment. There is a pollutant. So what we see then is that this story morphs from a psychological story, a psychological horror, into a bit more of an ecological one. However, I would say it still does maintain a psychological element and attention by virtue of it being a story in which the mother, Amanda, and her daughter are separated from each other. So there's always going to be that psychological tension, because, to spoil things, which you can probably already maybe deduce from this video, I've been trampling over the flower beds of spoilers. Like everything's pretty much spoiled. But as you can perhaps deduce, Amanda and her daughter, Nina, have been poisoned by this water, this tainted, contaminated water. And they're separated from each other. Amanda is in the clinic, and it seems like Nina is being taken to this green woman, this, what I can only describe as this folk witch doctor, essentially. And she engages in this witch doctor, she engages in like this process that's called like a migration, transference migration. And the idea is that she separates the soul of the afflicted, and it enters into the body of someone else, and someone else's soul enters into that. It's rather strange. But at the start of the story, we're exposed to this idea, this transmigration idea. However, as the story progresses and it becomes more apparent that this is actually a tangible ecological issue, that the water is actually being polluted with all the pesticides from the soybean farms and all the farms that are all around there. They're just using all these pesticides. It does put into doubt the legitimacy of this narrative, essentially the supernatural narrative. And it perhaps highlights that when people are uneducated or so used to being in an environment that is contaminated, toxic, and they have to make sense of it, they're going to resort to supernatural beliefs. And that's what this green woman seems to represent. The men are curiously oblivious or unwilling to confront this ecological issue as well. The men seem to be completely shut down in this story. They're briefly mentioned, both husbands of Amanda and Carla. However, they are in their own world. They seem to be slightly, even it seems, divorced from the issues of their families. And perhaps that's because they're going to work and they're working. That's what they're doing. However, right at the end, there is the perspective of one of the fathers, I forgot who it was, and he is driving, I think, through the countryside, and there's a really harrowing, hellish description of this rural countryside. So this juxtaposes the idea of the countryside being idyllic, bucolic, a place to get away from all the pollution of the cities, when in fact very often these countrysides, these rural areas, also face significant contaminants in their environments. So it does kind of flip that on its head and does call to attention, in perhaps quite a social way, the ills that could plague a countryside of people who are not quite educated, not quite aware of what's happening in their situation. And that's it. That's Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin. Not too long of a story, under 200 pages, and quite easily digestible. It is a bit, as I mentioned, delirious, a bit difficult to parse through for the first half. However, once you get into a rhythm, it can really suck you in. Anyways, take care.